You are watching Macro TV and we are busy with study unit 3, which is chapter 6 in Fourie and Berger. It's the ADAS model and we've already introduced the model and its equilibrium, and now in the next number of videos we'll be looking at specific shocks and how you can use the ADAS framework to model the impact that a shock has on income and prices in your aggregate macroeconomy. Let's first talk about a demand contraction and what happens if there's a contraction in demand. Now you can see in the graph on the right here that the initial equilibrium is at the long run level YS with a price P0, and you start there with the AD curve 0, the short run AS curve 0, and it's also a point on the long run AS curve. Now let's say there's a decrease in government spending. That means that there's less spending and the AAD curve moves to the left from 81 to 80 there, and that means that you now have a new equilibrium on the original short run AS curve with this new AD1 curve at a price P1 and a income level Y1. So this contraction in demand has caused a decrease in incomes and lower prices. Now, what does the adjustment process look like from that point? Now, at this point, P1 prices, the actual prices are lower than the expected prices. And that means that the suppliers can now offer their laborers lower wages because prices have decreased. And these lower wages means that you can have an increase in output. Production would increase from the level Y1 back to the level YS. And the short run aggregate supply curve moves to the right, as you can see there, from AS1 to AS short run 2, and the economy returns to equilibrium at the level of income YS, but at a much lower price level. So in this contraction in demand caused a recession and pushed prices down until you reach a new long-run equilibrium. Now, this is also called deleveraging, if you're interested in that. We can do an example of an increase in the repo rate. It's the same as with demand contraction scenario, and you can see it's possible to model this with the IS-LMBP and the ADAS curves together. So you know that an increase in the repo rate is contractionary monetary policy, and it moves the LM curve from LM0 to the left to LM1, as you can see over here. So that's the initial impact of the policy, and that is mirrored by a decrease in the aggregate demand from AD0 to AD1 on the right-hand side. It's similar to the previous graph. The equilibrium moves from 0 to 0.1. There is a recession, pushing prices down and reducing incomes. Now, we already know how this works. This increase in the repo rate means that there is less investment and less spending, and incomes are lower. While at the same time, this decrease in income means that there is less imports and a surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. The higher interest rates attract foreign capital, and there's also a surplus on the financial account of the balance of payments. And at point number 1, you are above and to the left of the original BP curve, and now an adjustment process needs to occur. We know that this adjustment process works via the money supply and via the exchange rate. So the first step is via the money supply from point 1 to equilibrium number 2. Now what happens is that this inflow of foreign money increases the money supply, moves the LM curve to the right from LM1 through to LM2, and you can see this again mirrored in the move of the AD curve from AD1 through to AD2 to the right. So again, that's an increase in demand. Because interest rates are now lower, investment is slightly higher, spending is slightly higher, and incomes are slightly higher. Because incomes are slightly higher, that means that imports are slightly higher, and you are narrowing that surplus on the current account. Because interest rates are lower, that also means less of an inflow of foreign capital into the financial account. And at equilibrium 2, you have you are closer to balance of payments equilibrium, but you're still above the BP curve, which means that another adjustment needs to take place. And this happens via the exchange rate. We already know that because there's a surplus on the balance of payments, the exchange rate will appreciate, which means a reduction in exports and an increase in imports. That shifts the IS curve to the left, and this contraction is mirrored in this decrease in the aggregate demand over here, moving to the left. And at the same time as the IS curve is moving to the left, the BP curve is moving upwards, mainly because of this increase in imports and also the lower interest rates, meaning less of an inflow of foreign capital into the financial account. And if this was only our chapter 4, we would stop and say the economy is now in equilibrium at 0.3. But now that we have the ADAS framework available, there's an additional step that becomes available. This additional step is the adjustment on the supply side of the economy. At this equilibrium point number 3, prices are lower than the expected price level P0, where we started in the long run equilibrium. And we now see this adjustment happening with an increase in supply, because prices are lower, the producers are able to offer their workers lower wages and increase the output. The AS curve moves to the right, and you can see this adjustment back to the long run equilibrium level of income, YS. So this video explained the medium run supply side adjustment when the demand contracts, the specific cases of an increase in the repo rate. Now, the next video will explain other shocks and policies and how we can use the ADS model to model those effects on output and prices.